so I'm recording and go ahead and eyeline there.
My name is Denise Coverley Paxton, and I teach 5th grade at Lena Juniper Elementary School in Washoe County School District in Sparks, Nevada. Today's lesson was on fractions. Students were being asked to make connections from what we previously have learned about fractions into problem solving, and with the end result being a real world problem that they would solve using fractions and data collection.
Good. All right, you ready to go to the questions? You did ELA the last time, right?
Yes.
Okay. So first question, we want to understand the decisions you made in planning for this lesson and how it fits into the unit and year. How does this lesson connect to let me pause this for a minute. Because first question, how does this lesson connect to and build on students' prior skills and knowledge, what was taught before the lesson, and what will come after it?
With this lesson, we have been working with fractions the past couple months. We've worked on what is a fraction, what do fractions look like, the different ways that we can represent fractions. We've also learned that fractions are equivalent to decimals and percents, and how that works in the real world, as well as mathematically, so that they have a good background of fractions before working with this lesson.
Talk about the standards or clusters targeted in the lesson. What did you do to make the lesson reflect the full intent of that standard or cluster?
With the 5th grade math standards, one of the clusters really focuses on fractions. Students being able to add and subtract fractions with unlike denominators, find equivalent fractions, find like denominators, being able to take their knowledge of fractions and apply it within story problems, and then real world situations. I made sure that I hit all of those standards within the 2 types of problems that I asked my students to solve, one through math task and whole class discussion and small group discussion. I incorporated whole class discussion strategies about fractions. Then they were using them within the story problems and then applying them to the real world situation. And on the real world situation, it's really important that the problem be real world for that age of student that's working with the problem. So asking a student to figure out how many buses to order for a field trip is not, although it's real world, it's not real world for a 5th grader. And so trying to find a problem that the 5th grader can make that personal connection and feel the purpose in the reason why they need to solve the problem and the purpose of the math.
Good. Talk about the standards or cluster targeted in the lesson. That's the one we just went over.
Yes.
Which of the core action indicators do you think this lesson best exemplified, and how did you plan for this? I did hit all 3 of the core actions. The first core action, I think, is really important when I plan my lessons, that I make sure that I focus on depth of knowledge instead of the breadth of knowledge. We can't just rush through anymore through the content, and making sure that students have multiple access and they're able to apply the concept in multiple ways. And so I tried to make sure that I did that within the math task through background knowledge, coming up and sharing strategies through the math task itself, sharing strategies within the math task, and then the real world application after. Let me pause it really quick. Do you mind doing that?
No.
So I'm recording, and then which of the core action indicators do you think this lesson best exemplified?
I really try and make sure that I hit all of the 3 core actions. The first core action I need is a change of thinking, I think, for teachers as far as looking at depth of knowledge instead of the
the breadth of knowledge, making sure that students have a really strong understanding instead of just going page by page, getting through the content. And I think I really did that with allowing the students to share their strategies. They had multiple access to the concepts and how to work with the fractions, sharing those strategies, and then the real world application problem. The core action 2, I did consult with a third grade teacher because I think it's really important that we understand how the standards build on each other. And so I worked with a third grade teacher in creating this lesson and getting his input on where his students are and their understanding of fractions and building that foundation. And then when they come to me as fifth graders, how their knowledge is just been built up layer upon layer, and that I can add that next layer before they move on to the sixth grade. And the core action 3, through their conceptual knowledge, they have it with they're able to use multiple strategies. They are sharing and discussing their strategies, so they're learning how others think mathematically about the same problem. The procedural, again, is the strategies that they know that there's more than one way to solve the problem. And maybe with the sharing and the discussion, to be able to determine, well, what's the most efficient strategy? And then the application comes at the end with their real world problem that they'll be solving using, again, the concepts of fractions.
We're interested in how the shifts required by the CCSS are being incorporated into your classroom. Discuss how this lesson illustrates the shifts required by the CCSS.
I have been involved in being trained with the Common Core state standards for about 3 years now, but through the Teaching American History project grants in our district. And I've been able to take the training that I've received through Social Studies ELA and apply it in the different content areas in my classroom, finding ways to incorporate math discussion into my classroom, as well as my students have to use claims, reasoning, and evidence to be able to discuss their math strategies, and always trying to not just answer it, but share their reasoning. Why is this the answer? Why did they choose the strategy that they chose? And so no matter what content area I'm teaching in my classroom, I try to make sure that my lessons are cross-curricular. So a math lesson is not just a math lesson. Last week I pulled in some slavery data because that's what we were studying in social studies. So the cross content is really important. And then again, that depth of knowledge in making sure that the students don't just have the skills, but they have a real strong foundation on how to apply those skills.
How did you teach the content of this lesson prior to the CCSS? What is the same and what is different?
I've always tried to incorporate hands-on and manipulatives. With the Common Core state standards, it's allowed me to have a clearer understanding of what my students' mathematical thinking is through discussion. I've always had my students working with math partners and to talk through their thinking, but it's not until this year that I have a better understanding of what math discussion looks like. And using the accountable talk helps with that, where students can agree, disagree, add on, show multiple strategies. And my students themselves have told me that they really have a better understanding through class discussion and the sharing and being able to see multiple strategies. And then being able to ask questions to students that are sharing those strategies, not just me as a teacher.
Let's pick it up from
Okay.
the last part. It's about the students. Okay.
So them being able to ask the questions to the students that are sharing the strategy, not me as a teacher sharing the strategy and then asking them, does anyone have any questions? So I've been able to do that. I forgot what we were answering.
So what is the same and what is different from what you're
I also, the real world application, I am one of those teachers that I'm sure many of us out there just thought a story problem was a real world application. And again, that aha moment of, oh, well, yeah, a fifth grader probably doesn't care what the dimensions of the playground are. They just want to know, can they go out and play on it? So trying to find story problems that, again, are real world for that age of students that I'm working with. So that's made a big difference. And then the math task, making sure that it's not just a different kind of worksheet that we're throwing in front of them, that we incorporate, again, multiple strategies and the discussion, which is so important.
Student engagement is crucial to the work of the CCSS. We want to understand how you ensure that all students have the opportunity to productively engage in the work of the lesson. How did the students handle this lesson? Did they understand the mathematics of the lesson?
The fact that I gave them manipulatives that they could use as a strategy to solve the problem. We started the lesson with whole class discussion, so making sure that they had the background of how to add fractions and what that should look like. And then through their small group discussions, being able to share their strategies and choose another student's strategy if they like. I do, with my lower students, I try to break it down even further for them, where we used highlighters and had a certain color for, because in the story problem there were 2 students eating pizza. And so the data that went with one student was highlighted in one color, and the data that went with the other child was highlighted with the other color. So it is more concrete for them and stands out more. And then they were able to use those same colors to then choose a strategy, and they used the circle fractions to be able to color in within that, what that data represents within the circle fraction.
Explain how you differentiated in this lesson. Did all students have the opportunity to work on grade level content? If all students did not have this opportunity, explain why.
So the way I differentiated was, again, not differentiating at the beginning of the lesson, but being able to walk around and look at my students and their mathematical thinking, and then from there deciding if I needed to scaffold a little bit more for them and give them a little bit more support, which would then give that differentiation. As I said, we use the markers for some of my below grade level students to, again, make it more concrete, make that information become more accessible to them. So I don't differentiate at the beginning of the math lesson. I then differentiate and add that scaffolding for them and the support as I see they need it.
Which behaviors from Core Action 3 did the students best exemplify in this lesson? And what actions have you taken as a teacher to make that happen?
I would say probably the procedural in Core Action 3. The fact that they were able to use multiple strategies, even if they all used a similar strategy, they explained it a little bit differently within their thinking. They showed it a little bit differently within their work on the window frame. And so the fact that there is no one way to get to that answer, and the students know that. One student asked, well, can I use multiple strategies? And my answer was absolutely. They aren't confined to, you have to choose one, and that's the only way that you can get to that answer.
Reflecting on the lesson, what worked particularly well and what might you do differently?
I was surprised that at the beginning of the lesson we had to spend a little bit more time than I initially had anticipated on, again, making sure that they had a clear foundation of adding fractions and then adding fractions with unlike denominators. What I had anticipated was probably going to be a 5-minute review because we've already worked with these type of problems. ended up being about 30 minutes. And as a teacher, we can only go as fast as our students allow us to. Again, looking for the depth instead of the breadth. And so I had to slow the lesson down, and we needed to spend more time on that because sending them to the math tasks wouldn't have given them the foundational skills to be successful with it.
Were there any surprises or unexpected student behaviors or reactions today?
I had one student that had a little bit difficult time getting started, and again, he is below grade level in math and doesn't really have his knowledge of fractions. He has a pretty good knowledge of fractions, of what fractions are, but then not how to add the fractions, and especially with unlike denominators. He's he's about at grade level in his reading, but when you put a story problem in front of him that has math content within it, somehow he gets lost in it. So again, being able to, I went over to him first and tried to talk him through where he needs to start, because he just had a blank slate. He hadn't made any progress to starting. And then I went and worked with another student that came in and out of my classroom and got her up to speed, and came back to him and saw that he still was not able to kind of take a leap off the cliff and get started with the problem. So I then helped him with that, and again, we highlighted the data that he was going to need and made it much more visually concrete for him, and then he was able to be successful with solving the problem in the math task. It was, I love listening to my students' discussion, and some people, when they come and observe, and they'll see students giving an incorrect answer or showing an incorrect way to solve a problem, and I notice that they kind of tense up and they're like, oh, they're showing them wrong, they're going to confuse them. But through discussion, students are able to have a clear understanding that wasn't the correct mathematical thinking to solve that problem, and then they have a clear understanding of conceptually of how the problem works and a deeper understanding of the math involved. In one of my groups, when they were sharing their strategies in answering the question, I had noticed that one of the groups, the boy that was sharing, had the incorrect answer. But then after the discussion, he came back and actually said, I would like to change my answer, and then was able to explain why. So he had a clear understanding of, yes, the mathematical thinking that he had some problems in it, and then after the group discussion, he was able to come back to his original thinking and make those changes, and not just make changes to the answer, but be able to reason it, use reasoning so that he has an understanding of why he needed to make those changes.
You're done. Thank you.